On the day Lucas Phelps got engaged to my sister, I sat in the front row of the audience. He saw me and inexplicably let out a sigh of relief. "Sienna Morgan, have you finally had enough? If you apologize, All the guests were in shock. They didn't know who he was talking to, 'cause I was already dead. Today was exactly 7 days after my death. The day before I died, Lucas broke up with me, because he was going to marry my sister. Gathering my courage, I asked him, "Lucas, can you not marry her?" Lucas's dark eyebrows furrowed. His face filled with displeasure as his large hand tightened around my waist. "Sienna, if you need money, just say so. Stop with the pretense, it's disgusting. Don't forget why you exist. You really love money that much? Love taking what's not yours? How cheap can you get?" My face fell. I hadn't forgotten. I existed because my sister Luna Morgan had a heart condition and couldn't handle physical strain. But my parents didn't want to miss the chance to cling to Lucas. So they sent me, their little debtor, to serve Lucas in her place. Yes, serve him. A completely unequal word. But when the gap in wealth and power is this huge, and even your own parents don't see you as human, all those ideas about human rights and women's rights become nothing but empty words. Your sister will be discharged from the hospital soon and ready to get married. You, this fraud, better get lost. Don't even think about stealing her golden husband. Do you even deserve to compare yourself to her? My mother's curses echoed in my ears. My chest ached and I gave a weak smile, wrapping my arms around Lucas's neck. Yeah, I could use some money. How about 50 grand more? The dim lighting hid the tears in my eyes. No one believed that I, the substitute, truly loved Lucas. Watching you get engaged, I think it's time for me to turn over a new leaf. Consider this money my dowry for all the years I've spent with you. On the day I died, Lucas was in a bad mood. After I mentioned wanting to get married, his face turned cold. He pulled away, leaving me with an empty feeling. Then he gave me 2 options. Take back what you just said or leave. He often made me choose, usually between apologize or get out. I normally chose the first one, because when he said to get out, he meant standing by the door all night long. But this time I decisively chose the second option. Pretending to be relaxed, I hopped out of bed to pack my things, but not before giving Lucas a lingering kiss on the lips and a bright smile. "Lucas, thank you for everything these past 3 years. Goodbye." After casting aside all the things Lucas had given me, I didn't have many personal belongings left. After all, someone with no home can't afford to own too much. By the time I finished packing, it was almost dawn. Dragging my suitcase, I quietly slipped out of the room. Lucas was already dressed in loungewear, waiting for me in the living room. With a flick of his wrist, he threw a breakup check for 50 grand at me, his face darker than I'd ever seen. His eyes flickered, his thin lips moved, and he actually spoke again. "Sienna, if you apologize now, I'll let you take it all back. You want money, right? Take it." His words were like a meteor hitting the earth, shocking me so much I almost dropped my suitcase. Lucas, the heir of the Phelps family. People always bent over backwards, offering him an out, begging him for mercy. When had he ever offered someone a way out? But no matter how great the honor, I had no intention of taking it, Lucas. "Brother-in-law, I wish you and my sister a happy marriage." With sincere blessings, I smiled and turned away. Then my face was covered in tears. My fingers clenched the suitcase handle, turning white, as I cried and laughed at the same time. Well, at least I had 50 grand, even if I no longer had him. It was enough to cover my grandma's surgery. She could live a long, healthy life now. For a long, long time. I died. The soup from the Lady of Forgetfulness was a bit bland. Didn't add any spring onions, huh, Granny? It doesn't taste good. I forced a pale smile at her. "Granny, have you seen my grandma? She should have been here about half an hour before me. You could learn from her." Tears of blood streamed down my face as I smiled bitterly, my heart breaking. "She makes the best soup in the world. She's the only one who ever loved me. It's my fault I couldn't save her." "But why, Granny? I was so close. I was just 1 step away. Just 1 step." The Lady of Forgetfulness looked at me with her pitch-black eyes, quietly gazing at me. Then she patted my head. Her hand was icy, but I felt warmth flooding into me. Child, you did your best. A flash of white light appeared before my eyes, and when I opened them again, I had returned to the world. I had become a spirit, bound within 5 meters of Lucas. On the first day after my death, I floated in the air bored watching Lucas work. He still looked handsome, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal his strong arms. The cufflinks were the ones I had picked. But what difference did that make? No matter how well I served him, I was just a substitute for my sister. After all, look at my sister's life and mine. How could I ever compare? To Lucas, my sister was his one and only childhood sweetheart, a precious princess he had cared for all his life. How could he let her do all these trivial housekeeper-like chores? But he had no problem bossing me around, the unwanted debtor my parents despised. However, Lucas seemed to be waiting for some news today, but it never came. He kept picking up his phone, unlocking it, checking it, then angrily putting it down. Especially as the workday ended, his face grew darker, almost like it was leaking ink. Weird. But I had to admit, without me there to remind him to eat on time, check the weather or share little things, he really didn't get many messages. I guess I really had been chatty before. No wonder he found me annoying. Day 2 after my death. Lucas's mood grew darker. When he got home, he threw out all the little things that once belonged to me. How over the top. He gave my sister diamonds and jewelry, but all I ever got were freebies. I never complained though, I treasured every little thing. But he didn't hesitate to throw it all away. The housekeeper, Zoe, nervously asked him, "Master, should we try to get Miss Sienna back?" I stood by her side, shaking my head. I was already dead. Where could they find me? It wouldn't be a matter of finding me anyway. It would be about fishing me out. Lucas kept a cold face, turned and went upstairs. No need. But strangely enough, that night he slept in my room holding my pillow. Day 3 after my death. Saturday. Lucas took a day off work and stayed home, burning all my photos. Even though our families had known each other for generations, I hadn't lived with my parents since I was 10. Naturally, I didn't have the same level of connection with Lucas that my sister did. It had taken 3 years of entanglement serving as a stand-in, and yet I didn't have a single proper photo with him. All the photos I had were ones I'd secretly snapped, pouring my heart and soul into them. And now he just burned them all in one go. You might as well fish me out and burn me too, Lucas. It's so cold at the bottom of the river. Day 4 after my death. Sunday. Lucas grabbed an axe and chopped down the trees I had carefully nurtured for 3 years. He personally uprooted the roses I had tenderly watered, fertilized, and cherished. What a jerk. He knew full well that those plants were my pride and joy. My sister loved flowers but only wanted the freshly picked, most vibrant ones. So, my mother forced me to change my college major to horticulture, giving up my dream just to please my sister. After I started living with Lucas, he paid a high price to set aside a plot in the garden just for me, so I could grow flowers for my sister. Every day, I would carefully select the freshest ones to send to her hospital room. And now that my sister was getting better, he could afford to rip them all out? Forget it, I won't hold a grudge. After all, I'm dead now. Without me to take care of them, those flowers would have died soon anyway. Just like, if Grandma hadn't taken me in, scavenging to feed me, I, the supposedly wealthy second daughter of the Morgan family, would have starved to death on the streets long ago, without anyone to claim my body. And now that Grandma's gone, I guess I'm dead too. They are just like me. Day 5 after my death. Lucas continued to sleep in my room, almost as if he had moved in permanently. My parents and sister came by, laughing and chatting with Lucas about the engagement plans. Most of the time it was just them talking. Lucas listened silently, but after a while he suddenly asked, "Why isn't Sienna here?" My parents and sister were momentarily stunned. Then my mom let out an awkward laugh and said casually, "That girl has always been wild, we can't control her. Who knows where she's off to again, never at home." I pursed my lips, listening from the side. It wasn't that they couldn't control me, they just didn't care. When my mother gave birth to my sister and me, she had a difficult delivery, nearly dying on the operating table. My sister was born with a heart condition, but I was perfectly healthy. People say twins often have a karmic connection. One is here to repay a debt, and the other to collect. In our case, it was clear I was the one collecting. My grandparents had always been dissatisfied with my mother, and they used this as an excuse to criticize her, accusing her of being useless and only giving birth to a liability. My mother blamed it all on me. She believed I had stolen my sister's nutrients in the womb, causing her to suffer, and in turn, making my mother a target for my grandparents' resentment. So, everything about me had to make way for my sister. While she suffered in the hospital, I wasn't even allowed to come home. They didn't know where I lived, let alone where I was now. Lucas simply said, "Oh," and didn't ask any further. A flash of jealousy crossed my sister's eyes before she leaned closer to Lucas, resting her head on his shoulder. "Lucas, maybe Sienna is mad at me. It's all my fault being so weak and always burdening her. Without me, Sienna could be happier, don't you think? If Sienna loves you as much as I do, I should let her have you." My sister's words only made my mother angrier. She immediately grabbed her other hand, gently patting it. "Luna, don't think like that. You're the luckiest one. Sienna is an ungrateful wolf. It was bad enough that she fought with you in the womb, but she doesn't have the right to steal your future husband too. Does she?" As she spoke, my mother's heartache was almost impossible to hide, and she pulled my sister into her arms. She gently patted her back to comfort her. "If she doesn't show up, so be it. Better that she doesn't come and spoil things." My sister weakly sobbed in my mother's arms. "But we're sisters born from the same mother. I'd still want her blessing on my wedding day." As she said this, she sneaked a glance at Lucas, her eyes probing. But Lucas simply looked down at his phone, lost in thought. I stood in front of them and mischievously blew ghostly breath into Luna's ear. "Luna, you're lying. You watched me die, yet you're pretending not to know. You're really something else." Then I reached out to my mom, sighing softly. "Mom's embrace. Is it warm? What does it feel like to be held by a mother? I guess it must feel like when Grandma held me. Yes, it should be the same." Day 6 after my death. People kept coming by to confirm the details of tomorrow's engagement, but Lucas seemed distracted. Finally, he told his assistant Caleb, "Find Sienna." At the same time, he sent me a WeChat message. "Sienna, come back. Name your price and I'll give it to you." I couldn't help but smile. Why does he think I love money so much? I'm dead, Lucas. What use would I have for money? But I didn't want Lucas to find me. I didn't want him to see my corpse. That pitiful, ugly corpse. Of course, Lucas didn't get a reply, and in frustration, he tossed his phone aside, his face turning dark as he muttered, "If you're brave enough, don't ever come back." It was the first time I had seen him act so childishly. I couldn't help but laugh and cry at the same time. "Lucas, this time I really do have the guts." Day 7 after my death. At the engagement party, as it was a marriage between two prominent families, the guest list was enormous. Many guests were chatting, saying how well-matched the couple was, having grown up together and now getting married. I sat in the front row, wanting to witness with my own eyes my beloved man marrying my beautiful and elegant sister. But my mother, Fong Yun Yun, sat beside me, her face serious as she texted my father. "Where on earth are you? If Sienna doesn't want to come, fine. But you need to come back quickly. What could be more important than Luna's wedding?" My father's reply showed us typing for a long time, finally sending one line. "Sienna is dead. She committed suicide by drowning 7 days ago." My mother's expression froze abruptly. For a moment she looked like she was in shock. My father's messages continued. "The body was recovered last night. Entertainment news has exploded. Almost the entire city knows about it. Luna's engagement was a joyous occasion. My death on the 7th day went unnoticed. Isn't it ironic? The entire city knows I'm dead. Yet my own parents are too busy organizing my sister's wedding to notice. No wonder the guests at the wedding all had strange expressions." My father then sent another message. "Today happens to be the 7th day. It's so unlucky." Oh, so he's blaming me for dying at an inconvenient time? Ruining Luna's engagement? Dad, it's really not my fault. It was my sister's choice to insist on that day, pushing me to my end. She kind of brought it on herself. As the music played, Lucas walked up to the altar with my sister, his arm around her. He looked incredibly handsome today. Although he was in a suit like always, today he was especially dashing. My sister looked beautiful too. Her makeup was done, and she looked even more stunning than when she was sick. We really are sisters. Our tastes in wedding dresses are similar. She wore the diamond-encrusted off-the-shoulder dress I loved, highlighting her long neck and graceful shoulders. It was wonderful. If only one of us could be happy, I hoped my sister would take my share of happiness and double it. Thinking this way, I didn't feel so resentful, considering I was already dead. However, it was strange. Even with my beautiful sister standing there, Lucas's gaze kept searching the audience, as if looking for someone. In the end, to my surprise, he actually made eye contact with me. With a relieved look, he spoke from above. "Sienna, have you finally caused enough trouble? Apologize to me and I." My sister's face suddenly changed, and she almost blurted out, "Lucas, what are you saying?" "Sienna, clearly." I raised an eyebrow, thinking to myself, did she almost slip up? But my sister, true to her nature, quickly recovered and awkwardly forced a smile. "Sienna," she meant, "she's not coming." My mother, next to me, wasn't as calm. She looked like she was about to go crazy from the shock, staring at my spot with a pale face. "Lucas, what nonsense are you talking? There's no one here." My mother was panicking badly. Lucas was stunned, clearly pointing at me, his gaze sweeping across the guests. "She's right here. Can't you see her?" My sister's and mother's faces changed. The guests were in an uproar. Some of the more timid ones had already started running away. After all, it was the 7th day. One couldn't ignore the superstitions. My sister stepped forward, grabbing Lucas's arm with one hand and clutching her chest with the other. She bit her lip, her expression full of delicate vulnerability and charm, making me want to hug her even from where I was. "Lucas, stop joking. Sienna said she wouldn't come. It's so chaotic now. I'm a little scared and anxious. I don't feel well at all. We're still in the middle of the ceremony. Don't let this small issue." But Lucas didn't listen. He shook off her hand, his face darkening as he strode over to stand in front of me, frowning deeply. "Sienna, what are you trying to do now?" I was a bit shocked. It was the first time I saw my sister's heart condition fail to stop Lucas. Whenever she complained of heart pain before, at 3 a.m., Lucas would drop everything and rush to the hospital with her. There was even a time when I had acute appendicitis in the middle of the night, and Lucas would abandon me halfway, taking me out of the car to catch a taxi because of something my sister said, ignoring my condition. Thinking of this, I tilted my head and smiled faintly at Lucas. What can a ghost do? Lucas's patience seemed to be wearing thin as he shouted, "Sienna, speak up." At this, more guests fled in panic. Even my mother took a few steps back. My sister, however, remained unmoving, her face ashen, her fists clenched, staring intently in my direction. But through her gaze, I could tell she couldn't see me. Among the fleeing crowd, Caleb stood out as he moved against the flow. He made his way through the crowd, his face serious as he approached Lucas, pausing for a moment before taking a deep breath. "Lucas, we've found Miss Sienna. She committed suicide by drowning 7 days ago. Her body is now at the hospital." Lucas looked as if struck by lightning. His dark eyes locked onto me in disbelief. I tilted my head and gave him a sorrowful smile. I wasn't lying. I'm really dead. 11. The fact that Lucas could see me was beyond my imagination and clearly beyond his. Even with my death notice and my body right in front of him, he couldn't believe it. He trembled as he reached out to touch my face. I stood still, allowing him to reach out, but his fingers passed through my soul and touched nothing but empty air. The shock of this phasing through effect was more effective than any body could be. In that fleeting moment, the emotions in Lucas's eyes began to crumble. They shattered into a state of incredulous tremors. He kept reaching out, trying to touch, hold, and connect with me, but all his efforts were in vain. To my sister and mother, he seemed to be going mad. Lucas shook his head, refusing to accept it, reaching out repeatedly. "Impossible, impossible. Sienna, I'm dead." I stood quietly, my emotions calm, only feeling a sense of confusion. Didn't he say he didn't love me? Wasn't I just a stand-in for my sister? Hadn't he bullied me for years for my sister's sake? Now with this act, I almost thought he really loved me. Besides Grandma, who could love Sienna? On the day we broke up, I died. drowned in the river not far from the hospital. The water was so cold at night, really cold. As I spoke, I paused, tilting my head with a pleading smile. My grandma's body is still in the hospital. I don't know how they will handle it. Since I served you for 3 years, could you help me bury us together? I'm afraid Grandma won't find me in her next life. Lucas's hand, hanging by his side, began to tremble violently. He stared at me, his eyes turning red, and then he let out a roar, kicking the chair beside me with all his might. The row of chairs didn't move an inch but made a loud noise that startled everyone. Stop this fucking act. I told you to stop acting, Sienna. Get out here. Stop playing around. There should be a limit to this, Sienna. Come out. TSK. His temper is still as bad as ever. Always shouting at me. Can he only see me but not hear what I say? Does he think I'm some kind of hologram? Should I turn into a mushroom for him? Lucas, calm down. Caleb, the assistant, was still the one holding things together. Before Lucas's rage escalated further, he stepped forward and grabbed Lucas's arm. Lucas, listen to me. Miss Sienna's body is indeed in the hospital morgue, confirmed dead for 7 days. My mother and sister quickly moved forward, seemingly wanting to say something, but Caleb stopped them with a look. Then Caleb looked at Lucas seriously. Or let's go claim the body first, and then decide on the next steps. Caleb spoke rapidly, fearing that if he spoke too slowly, Lucas might explode again. After finishing, he immediately released Lucas and stepped back a few paces. I watched and couldn't help but admire. As expected of Special Assistant Caleb, he really knows how to handle people. Perhaps ghosts are less sensitive or slow to react, but I felt calm facing Lucas now. He's right, brother-in-law. It's the 7th day today. You can see me, which might be a bit of mysticism. Maybe you won't see me tomorrow. Why not kindly help collect my body and fulfill my unfinished wish? After all, you've bullied me quite a lot these 3 years. Of course you can refuse. After all, I can't do anything about it. Lucas stared at me deeply, his chest rising and falling violently, and the veins on his neck bulging. Just as I thought he was about to hit someone, he only said one word. Go. 12. Seeing my own body was quite a peculiar feeling. So peculiar that I wanted to cover my face. It looked terrible. After being soaked in the river for 7 days, my body was indeed hideous. Pale and bloated, even the shoes Grandma bought for me were torn. My mother, as if finally remembering I was her own daughter, stared blankly at my body as soon as she entered. She had been shocked when she received the news of my death. Now, seeing it with her own eyes, there was a sadness in her gaze that felt unfamiliar to me. How could this happen? Suicide. In the morgue there were 2 police officers, a man and a woman. The woman, with a cold face, handed over a document with an unhappy expression. Her gaze swept over my sister in her wedding dress, my mother in her festive cheapao, and my father in his suit. Her tone was sarcastic, with a forced smile. Your sister went missing for 7 days, but it didn't delay the wedding. If it were up to me, you could wait until after the wedding, after the baby is born, and after the baby can cry at the grave, then come to mourn. It would have the same effect. My mother was caught off guard, her expression frozen, almost crying, which was a bit comical. My sister pulled my mother back, offering an apologetic smile to the female officer, speaking in a gentle tone. Sorry, my mother is just overwhelmed with grief and hasn't fully processed it. The female officer's mocking gaze scanned my sister's wedding dress and replied, Oh. I silently gave the female officer a thumbs up. Finally, Lucas, who entered last, only glanced at my body once before turning his face cold, turning to stare at my soul. His voice was indifferent and stubborn. She's not Sienna. Sienna is right in front of me. I didn't respond, tilting my head and lowering my gaze to his hand. If Lucas hadn't been shaking so violently when he said that, I might have believed his claim of not. He had clearly recognized me, but he was unwilling to believe. After saying this, Lucas moved forward, making a gesture as if to grab my arm, but halfway through, he seemed scared and withdrew. He stiffly and resolutely said, Sienna, come home with me. The 2 police officers and my father looked at him as if he were crazy. My sister had calmed down from her initial shock and gently explained to the 2 officers. The impact was too great, and he's experiencing hallucinations. The male officer glanced at Lucas's wedding suit and understood, saying, "Ah, brother-in-law and sister-in-law, such a good relationship." The female officer, however, sneered coldly. I raised an eyebrow at the pretty female officer, thinking, "Oh, this sister has some stories. She really understands the dynamics between sister-in-law and brother-in-law. If I weren't dead, I'd have a good chat with her about how I was treated as a bedwarmer with no rights." Lucas ignored the other noises, stubbornly repeating, "Sienna, come home with me." I smiled. "I have no home. Sienna never had a home. A home should be a place where you never have to worry about being driven away. If you're easily driven out, how can it be considered a home? Lucas, have you forgotten? Every time you came back from the hospital after seeing my sister suffering, you would get so angry that you'd drive me out of the house, making me sleep on the bench in the yard? For 3 years, every time my sister wasn't happy, I'd be driven out. No matter the time, the weather, whether I was dressed warmly or thinly. And I had to be on call at all times, working hard without complaint. When my sister wanted crabs in the middle of the night, I had to make them immediately and deliver them, carefully peeled. Even a minute late, I had to wait an hour outside the ward, watching as you threw away the crab meat I painstakingly peeled. Because my sister couldn't eat cooling foods. How could that be called a home? Lucas should remember. So he froze, his expression a mix of complexity and seriousness. But in the end, he still said coldly and stubbornly, "She's not Sienna, we can't claim the body." Teen. The female officer took a deep breath, but she couldn't keep her composure. She slammed the documents on the table with anger. The papers scattered, some falling to the ground. "She's dead. Can't she be put to rest peacefully? Sienna suffered so much in life. Can't she find peace in death? How much do you hate her?" The word hate wasn't entirely accurate. Lucas didn't hate me. He just despised and looked down on me. In fact, Lucas and I played together before I turned 10, and he was very kind to me back then. He was a gentle and caring older brother who often played with me after visiting my sister. But that year, my sister's illness had reached its peak. Every time she saw me, she cried, lamenting that her health had been taken away by me. She cried that I had caused her such suffering. She cried that I lived so happily and carefree, and that I could play with her Lucas brother. Her cries broke my mother's heart, and her gaze towards me became full of disdain. That night, when we returned home, she threw my rice bowl, saying I was heartless for still being able to eat when my sister was so ill. When my mother was about to hit me in her anger, my father casually said, "Since we have multiple properties, if Luna doesn't want to see her and doesn't want her to be in contact with Lucas, then let her live somewhere else. We can bring her back when Luna is no longer suffering." Thus, at the age of 10, I moved out of the Morgan family home. I never saw Lucas again. 3 years ago, when we met again, I had become my sister's stand-in, and he had become my financial supporter. I still remember that gloomy rainy day. I stood in Lucas's living room, my excitement freezing when I heard his first words upon seeing me. "Sienna, after all these years, you're still so fond of taking other people's things." In that moment, I felt as if I saw my own parents. I realized clearly that in Lucas's eyes, I would forever be a sinner who must repay my sister's debt with a lifetime of suffering. "Hayes." My father suddenly frowned and bent down to pick up a piece of paper. It was my bank statement. Most of the transactions were money sent to the same person. My father pondered for a while, then seemed to remember something. "That nanny who was fired for stealing from us? Why did Sienna send her money?" The female officer let out a very quick, faint sneer. Then she reined in her smile and looked at my father seriously. "Because she was the only person who treated Sienna well these years. Because she, relying on scavenging and odd jobs, supported Sienna for 8 years so she wouldn't starve or freeze to death." After saying this, the entire room fell into a dead silence. My sister seemed to hear this for the first time, covering her mouth in shock. How could this? 14. Yes, how could it be? The wealthy Morgan family's second daughter almost starved on the streets. The female officer shrugged again in a sarcastic manner. My sister, having been undermined twice by her, finally couldn't maintain her composure. She looked up at Lucas, whose face was dark and silent, then turned to my parents with tears in her eyes, holding her heart. Dad, Mom, was Sienna really living like this all these years? Why didn't you tell me? I almost laughed out loud. The way she spoke, they never cared about me. So how could they have known that the housekeeper didn't follow their instructions and didn't send me regular living expenses? A child who wasn't loved by their parents would be even less cared for by others. The money sent by the housekeeper covered my school fees, leaving only 60 yuan a month, just enough for 2 buns a day, paired with the buy 5 get 1 free pickled vegetables from Wujiang. Any additional expenses like buying a pencil eraser would mean I had to go hungry for a few days. When I almost fainted from hunger on the street that day, I was fortunately found by Grandma, who had taken care of me when I was young but had been driven away because of her honesty. She found me, took me in, and gave me warmth and a nurturing embrace. But I ultimately failed to protect her. 3 years ago, Hazel was diagnosed with stomach cancer and was hospitalized with a severe illness. Sienna was the one paying for her high medical expenses. And coincidentally, on the morning Sienna paid for the surgery, Hazel passed away on the operating table. Half an hour after her death, Sienna also committed suicide by jumping into the lake. After saying this, the female officer looked up at my sister and my parents. Did you know even a little bit? In response to the female officer's question, my mother shook her head repeatedly, her tone defensively indignant. Then why didn't she say she was short of money? We've brought her back for family reunions. As she spoke, she couldn't continue, her expression showing a hint of regret. Clearly, she remembered I had told them many times that the money from the housekeeper wasn't enough and asked them to check. But how did they respond? Your sister is suffering in the hospital, and you still dare to spend money. You're so good at lying to get money. How can you be so shameless? Where did you get the face to live such a good life? And the last time they noticed I was short on money and took the initiative to send me money, it was because I agreed to be my sister's stand-in and didn't want to appear too shabby, upsetting Lucas. The room fell into a deathly silence. Lucas looked at my sister with a cold gaze, his voice carrying an icy tone that even made me shiver. So this is what you meant when you said Sienna came to me to compete with you? She was jealous of you having me, a wealthy fiancé, and coveted my fortune and power? Lucas, I didn't know. I really thought. Luna's face turned ashen, clutching her chest, gasping weakly. She looked at my mother with a pleading expression. Mom, my chest hurts so much. 15. My mother, pale-faced, was clearly still in shock from my death. But Luna's cries brought her back to reality. She anxiously supported Luna, like a hen protecting her chicks. I said it. I was afraid Sienna might have developed greed, so I told Luna deliberately. I lowered my eyes unsurprised. Luna's mother was indeed a good mother. But Sienna's mother was not. Greed. The female officer slowly repeated the word. Then, with a contemptuous smile, her eyes reddened. She sold blood to raise money for Hazel's treatment and almost was deceived by a black market clinic into selling her kidney. Mrs. Lin, I don't understand. Both are daughters, so what did Sienna do wrong? Didn't you give her life and bring her into this world? When Sienna was suffering, did you ever stand in front of her like you did today? Even once? Tears fell as the female officer turned her head to look at my lifeless body. Her voice trembled violently. She never felt a shred of warmth except from her grandmother. She died so coldly. The water in the night was very cold. When I fished her out, the coldness drilled into my bones, making me shiver uncontrollably. What did she do wrong? Yes, what did I do wrong? It wasn't my fault my sister was ill. It wasn't my fault my grandparents had a distaste for my mother. If given a choice, I would rather be the one with the heart condition. Where did I go wrong? What did I take? Why, no matter how hard I tried, did they never love me? My mother, bombarded with questions, went pale. Used to shifting all the blame onto me, she now couldn't find anyone else to shift the responsibility onto. Her well-maintained face lost all color, and after taking a few deep breaths, she staggered a few steps back, unable to stand. She took Luna's health and mine. Stumbling, my mother fell to the ground, her gaze aligned with my pale corpse. She gasped, shaking her head in fear. Mom! It hurts so much I can't breathe. Luna suddenly clutched her chest, bent over, and began breathing heavily, seemingly in great pain. Lucas unexpectedly remained still. But my father, who had been silent throughout, quickly came over and lifted her up, striding towards the door. Get moving. Don't let Luna stay with the dead. Forget about how Sienna was before. We only have this one daughter. We can't lose her too. My mother, snapped out of it by his shout, glanced at me and then gritted her teeth, following quickly. The female officer, furious, clenched her fists. This family deserves to die. If I were Sienna, even as a ghost, I would drag them to hell. Sister, ghosts don't have such power. I floated over and comfortingly patted her shoulder. Thank you, stranger. Sienna says thank you. Lucas suddenly spoke, his eyes red, staring at the female officer. The female officer was stunned, turned her face away, and started crying again. You don't deserve to represent her. You're all bad people. 16. My body remained in the hospital's morgue. No one came to claim it. Ignoring the female officer's anger, Lucas left the hospital with a cold face, accompanied by Caleb. Back in the car, his face was ashen, veins bulging on the back of his hand gripping the steering wheel. I floated in the back seat, persistently speaking. Lucas, after the 7th day, I might really disappear. Please help me take Grandma's body. Shut up. Lucas suddenly yelled, startling both me and Caleb. Caleb tentatively asked, Shing. Lucas. Lucas coldly said, Get out. And Caleb immediately understood, opening the car door to leave. But just before closing the door, Lucas added, Find out where Hazel is buried. Yes. The car door shut. Lucas started the car, still not looking back at me. The scenery outside the window receded gradually, the silence feeling somewhat oppressive. I thought for a moment, then floated to the passenger seat. Lucas, Shut up. Lucas kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his chiseled profile set in a cold expression. I will keep you. I sighed. But I'm dead. Didn't you see my body? Lucas suddenly raised his voice, his face frozen with anger. You're right in front of me, so why should I accept that you're dead? That's not you. I can't collect your body. I shivered in fear again. You're so fierce. Why is your temper always so bad? He's yelling at me even though I'm dead? Lucas gritted his teeth, his jaw twitching, then threw out 2 words. I'll change. I was stunned. Lucas continued. I'll change everything you don't like as long as you stay. His tone softened abruptly, carrying a gentle plea. Sienna, tell me, how can I bring you back? I frowned slightly, feeling confused. What's the point of saving me? I committed suicide. The meaning of suicide is having no attachment to this world. Grandma is gone. What use is there in my living? I didn't speak further, and Lucas didn't either. He just drove back home. Then he frantically mobilized all his connections, searching for a way to return or retain my soul. I used to be a skeptic, but now I was haunted, unable not to believe. I floated in the air, very curious, waiting to see if there was any supernatural way to keep my soul. And Lucas, true to form, with the mobilization of money and power, by 8 in the evening, someone proposed a seemingly viable solution. They say in web dramas that burning a shangxi can connect with ghosts. Shangxi. A couple of thousand gold worth of shangxi. For Lucas it was nothing. He was truly wealthy. News of the high-priced shangxi quickly spread, and Lucas put down his phone, looking up at me. Although his excitement wasn't overt, his eyes were bright. Soon, someone will bring the shangxi. Sienna, I will keep you. I will definitely keep you. I floated down, staring at the madness in his eyes. Lucas, have you forgotten? You're my brother-in-law. You used to dote on my sister so much, bullying me constantly for her. When she cried, I had to cry twice as much. When she hurt, I had to hurt twice as much. So why go through all this trouble to keep me? Are you not satisfied with repaying my sister with my life? Do you want to drag me back to continue repenting? Is she the apple of everyone's eye, while I'm just some grass? 17. Lucas paused, his lips moving slightly as he looked down, not meeting my eyes. After a long moment he spoke softly, but I heard him clearly. I don't want to lose you. It wasn't the answer I expected. But thankfully it wasn't. Reflecting on his various actions these days while floating beside him, it really did seem like he had fallen in love with me. Lucas, do you know why I like you? I suddenly changed the subject. Lucas's whole body shivered, and he looked stunned. The first candy I ever ate was given to me by you. I still remember its taste. I couldn't believe something in the world could be so sweet. I was really starved for love, desperate for someone to love me. Just a bit of warmth made me cling desperately. So agreeing to stay with you wasn't just about the money. It was also about indulging my own romantic fantasies. This 3-year arrangement, while saving Grandma, was also a form of indulgence for my romantic inclinations, acknowledging that I had fallen for Lucas. But no matter how much I loved him, there was a line. I never imagined going all the way with Lucas. I only thought of ending the arrangement, saving Grandma, and then decisively withdrawing. Lucas, while loving my sister, was able to accept using me as a substitute. Not only did he insult me, but he also insulted the very notion of love. I couldn't accept that my entire family tacitly approved of this arrangement. Didn't they see anything wrong with it? So when I broke up with him, I said, "Don't marry Luna." Not "don't marry her, marry me." That was my final advice to him, and nothing more. My sister, with her poor heart, was not a good choice for a wife. But Lucas retorted with the word cheap. He responded with 3 years of disrespect and bullying. So Lucas, never say you love me. It's too disgusting. Lucas's expression suddenly froze. His thin lips trembled as he was about to speak, but his phone rang. The urgent ringtone seemed to tear through the room's dense sadness, and I sighed in relief. Lucas wiped his face and answered the phone. It was Caleb. "Lucas, someone has delivered a 2-pound piece of shengshi. The money has been paid. Also, we found out where Mrs. Hazel is buried. Should we?" Lucas's fingers tightened, knuckles whitening from the pressure. After a few violent breaths, he coldly refused. "No need." I raised an eyebrow, not surprised. Caleb wasn't surprised either. He paused and added, "When searching for Hazel's body, I saw a familiar face in the hospital surveillance. The last person Sienna and Mrs. Hazel saw was her." Lucas's brow twitched sharply. "Who?" "Your fiancée, Luna. 18. Whether or not the shengshi worked, I didn't disappear after the 7th day. Lucas stayed up all night, enduring the vigil with me until dawn. The moment the sun peeked over the horizon, his tense chest relaxed, and he looked up at me with a victorious smile. "Sienna, I've kept you." I sat by the window, quietly watching the white smoke from the shengshi rise into the air, not turning around. "In my heart," I replied. "Did you really keep me? Can you really keep me? Even if he wanted to keep me, could anyone help him?" Sure enough, in the afternoon, my parents arrived with my sister. My sister looked much better, but her expression was still sorrowful and fearful. My mother seemed to have barely slept, her face in poor condition. A woman who usually needed makeup even to walk the dog was now unkempt. My father. A man who couldn't even handle the discord between his wife and his in-laws, who had let my mother be oppressed by my grandparents for years without lifting a finger. What could he do? My grandparents were biased towards males, and my father was too. Out of 2 daughters, he actually didn't care much about either. It was just that everyone called me a debt collector, and he grew to dislike me even more. The day Luna had her episode was the first time I saw my father so anxious about my death. Because with me gone, he only had 1 daughter left. He couldn't afford to neglect her now. If something happened to Luna, he would have no children left. At nearly 50, the chance of having another child was slim. "Lucas, Sienna's body has been in there for a long time. Shouldn't we claim it for cremation? The whole city is abuzz, waiting to see how we handle this. Delaying further isn't good for either family," my father said, frowning, looking at Lucas with apparent coldness. His dissatisfaction was clear. After all, Lucas was his future son-in-law. Though he usually didn't respect him, it seemed even worse now. "Sienna will live. No cremation." Lucas, with a cold face, looked up at the 3 people in front of him. The depth in his eyes left them all stunned. Luna calmed herself, forced a delicate smile, and approached, gently tugging at Lucas's sleeve. "Lucas, I was very sick yesterday. You didn't come to see me. Is it because you're angry with me over Sienna? I'm also very pained by Sienna's situation. I had no idea why Mom and Dad." "She knew." I spoke slowly. The day I died, she was on the riverbank, watching me tie stones to my feet and jump in. No, to be precise, she forced me to jump. I stared at Luna intently and noticed my mother suddenly looking in my direction, her eyes growing fearful. Did you not know? Lucas laughed, as if seeing Luna clearly for the first time, staring at her face that resembled mine. Then he laughed self-mockingly. Luna, you've been with the hospital since you were young, so I and your parents always subconsciously thought you were a simple, pure girl. But now it seems. You lie without blinking. No wonder over the years, using your heart condition as an advantage, you've had us all dancing in your palm. 19. Luna's expression changed, her smile became forced, and a trace of guilt flashed in her eyes. But when she looked up again, she put on that pitiable, sickly sweet demeanor. Lucas, what are you talking about? How could I know something you don't? Really? Lucas sneered, suddenly slamming a stack of documents onto the coffee table. It was several colored printouts of surveillance footage, clearly showing her sitting by Grandma's bed, crying and wailing. It also showed Grandma being wheeled away for emergency treatment, and Luna's mocking smile. It further recorded her sarcastic expression as she faced my hysteria. The contrast with her current fragile, sickly image was striking. My parents were stunned, especially my mother, who looked at Luna in disbelief. Luna, you knew Hazel? Why did you go to see her? Luna opened her mouth, tears falling first. Yes, I knew. I knew she raised Sienna. I went to see her because I was afraid Sienna would cling to Lucas, continuing to disrupt my marriage. I wanted her to persuade Sienna not to seduce her brother-in-law and be the other woman. I didn't expect she would suddenly fall ill, and I didn't expect Grandma to be irretrievably lost on the operating table. My fists clenched tightly, and my hatred for Luna made me want to tear her apart. Grandma truly loved me. How could she withstand such a blow? The last thing she wanted was to burden me. I clearly remember that day being very gloomy. The hospital corridor filled with the smell of disinfectant. Each breath seemed to strip away the moisture in my heart, turning into knives that cut through every capillary. Doctors and nurses cruelly told me Grandma was gone, forever gone. I crazily wanted to make Luna pay with her life. But my sister, arrogantly and disdainfully, looked at me. She said, Sienna, what right do you have to demand my life? You still owe me for this life. As long as I have my heart condition, Mom will always be pained for me and detest you. Lucas's addiction to you doesn't matter. With me here, you'll always be the other woman. Actually, 10 years ago, I cried that way on purpose because I saw you and Lucas playing in the garden. He gave you candy and smiled at you. He never smiled at me. He always just said, I hope you get better soon. Why can you, Sienna, and I can't? So, she used her advantage with a few casual words to drive my parents to expel me, to make me disappear from Lucas's world. Sienna, as long as I'm here, no one will ever truly love you. Indeed, Grandma is gone. How could anyone truly love me now? Sienna, you're so pitiful that an old lady without blood relations could make you so desperate. Rather than thinking about taking me down with you, you might as well die quickly to save her from walking alone in the underworld. 20. The surveillance footage replayed Luna's every word clearly. My mother covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face, unable to believe these words came from her beloved daughter. You caused Sienna's death? Luna, she's your sister. No matter how much you hate her, how could you? What was she saying? Did my mother think that no matter how much chaos there was, as long as I survived, she was still a good mother? God, she might as well have had me die like Luna wanted. She'd rather recognize Hazel as her family than consider you as her mother. Mom, wake up. Seeing this, Luna stopped pretending. Her eyes filled with clear hatred as she looked at my mother. Her face, twisted with anger and resentment, was truly ugly. Mom, you and I are the same. We're both victims dragged down by Sienna. It's better she's dead. The world will be peaceful. Sienna even thanked me for pushing her to die. Luna's words were indeed true. Her statement was what woke me from my despair. I no longer cared about retrieving Grandma's body. What did it matter where the corpse was? I just wanted to join Grandma quickly. She loved me the most. I couldn't let her walk alone in the underworld. So, I rushed out of the hospital and leaped into the river without hesitation. and Luna followed closely behind, watched me sink with cold indifference. I. Luna's words left my mother speechless. The color drained from her face, as if she was just realizing how harshly she had treated me before. Luna, you won. Maybe twins are always like this. One collects debts, the other pays. It seems that from the moment you had your heart condition, I was destined to be the one collecting debts. I wonder, was I really victorious in the womb 10 years ago? If I had known Mom would be such a mother, I'd rather have given my life to you, so you could live for both of us. After speaking to Luna, I sighed lightly, feeling suddenly exhausted. I didn't want to hear any more of this farce. I just wanted to go upstairs and hide for a while. No. Sienna, don't go. A heart-wrenching cry came from behind. I was startled, turning around to see my mother, who had gone mad, staring at me intently. Her eyes were red, and fatigue lined her bloodshot eyes. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be? She also? In my confusion, my mother rushed towards me, tears pouring uncontrollably. But after years of indifference, she couldn't really express any guilt. Sienna, is it really you? Sienna, can you not leave? Your sister didn't mean to force you to death. Forgive her and also forgive. At this moment, she was still speaking up for Luna. I looked down numbly, staring at the leather shoes Grandma bought me, and smiled helplessly. I've always hoped that one day you'd hug me. But you see, we really don't have a mother-daughter fate. Now we can't even have a hug. Sienna's mother isn't a good mother, so she doesn't need a mother anymore. Hopefully in the next life we won't meet. My mother trembled, reaching out to embrace me, but how could she? Lucas suddenly stood up and grabbed my mother. You can see her too? My mother showed a look of panic, nodding desperately. Yes, I can see her. Lucas, do you have a way? Can you save her? She. 21. Luna was terrified by them both. Her face turned pale as she looked in my direction, incredulously raising her voice. What are you doing? Sienna is already dead. Haven't you all hated her? She's dead, so who are you putting on this show for? Lucas initially showed no reaction to her words, but when he heard the last part, he suddenly looked up, his eyes sharp and glaring at her. This was the first time Lucas had been so fierce with my sister. She was scared. If you hadn't been constantly feeding me the idea that Sienna was trying to get close to me just to habitually compete with you, how would I have treated her like that? No matter how much she was bullied or wronged, she accepted all my demands. But I only saw her as trying to steal your things, wanting money. I was angry. Always because she didn't have me in her heart. Lucas's voice was soft, but each word carried a palpable sense of despair and pain. I was momentarily stunned. My sister was stunned as well, but then she began to laugh madly. Lucas, do you think you're a saint of love? Do you think that as long as you blame me, you're absolved of wrongdoing? In the end, you, my mother, and I are no different. We're all despicable people who refuse to face our own misery and transfer our anger to Sienna. What Sienna went through before, why she was so short of money, why she agreed to be your substitute, isn't it hard to find out? But did any of you investigate? She explained so many times, sought so many opportunities to talk to you. Did you ever believe her? You didn't. Because you're all the same, only willing to believe the Sienna in your hearts. A debtor who has always known how to steal from others, morally corrupt and irredeemable. Luna, who was usually gentle and delicate, was now shouting with veins bulging in her neck. My mother trembled, looking at her. Luna, how can you say that? Sienna is your sister. Sister? You didn't even treat her like a daughter. Why should I treat her like a sister? Luna had given up on pretending, coldly looking at my mother. Mom, have you forgotten how you used to call her a debtor? How you always said she didn't deserve anything? Now that she's dead, has it awakened your maternal love? My mother's chest heaved, struggling to speak but unable to find the words. Because Luna was right. Everyone in this room was an accomplice in pushing me towards suicide. But none of them were the direct killers. They only used their cold indifference, taking advantage of my expectations from them to look down on me and hurt me without restraint. Luna was right. At its core it was them. They never truly valued me. They saw me as a sinner, a debtor to Luna, which is why they felt justified in treating me poorly, in digesting the dark aspects they were unwilling to face. Rhino horn. Turning her head, Luna saw the large black rhino horn on the incense table, and suddenly seemed to understand something. Indeed, having lived in the hospital for years, Luna read more than anyone else present. She could certainly guess the purpose of the rhino horn, and she understood why my mother and Lucas could see me. She suddenly stood up and grabbed the rhino horn, turning to my father with a wild laugh. Dad, with the rhino horn, neither of us can see Sienna. It seems you, like me, never really cared about her. 22. My father showed a mix of embarrassment and anger at being exposed, muttering angrily, "What are you talking about? What am I talking about? Dad, you never loved us, did you?" Luna sneered, her gaze shifting to my mother's face. Mom, the key to the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship was never about Sienna. The real reason Grandpa and Grandma didn't like you was because Dad was always useless. If you're unwilling to admit you married a useless man, you blame Sienna. How are you any better than me? My mother tightly covered her mouth, but she didn't even spare Luna a glance. She just cried and looked at me. Sienna, I'm sorry. Mom was wrong. Please don't go. I'll be good to you in the future. Luna, put it down. Lucas's usual calm demeanor shattered instantly. He was frantic, like a poor man who had just broken a valuable antique, helpless yet burning with anxiety. Luna looked at him, sneering. You really did fall for her, didn't you? Lucas, weren't you always the one who cared for me? We've been childhood friends for years, and you've pampered and loved me for so long. And yet, you still let Sienna take you away, didn't you? I won't let you have a chance to see her. Absolutely not. Luna grabbed a lighter nearby, lit it, and moved it towards the rhino horn. Lucas panicked immediately. No. Luna, don't. Luna twisted her smile, but her eyes were red. As the lighter set the rhino horn alight, she both laughed and cried. Just one step away, I could have married you and been happy. Why? Lucas rushed over, shoving Luna aside and grabbing the flaming rhino horn from her. Luna fell heavily to the ground, clutching her chest, curling up. It hurts. Lucas, save me. She seemed to be truly suffering from a heart condition, her lips turning blue, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. But Lucas didn't even glance back, frantically putting out the fire on the rhino horn. Fortunately, the rhino horn didn't catch fire easily. It burned only a little before the flame went out. My father had already rushed over, picking up my sister once more and heading towards the door. Lucas coldly stared at his back, his voice chillingly low. Don't let her die. After she recovers, send her to where Sienna used to live. She should suffer the same fate as Sienna did. Otherwise, the Morgan family will go bankrupt. Uncle Morgan should know I'm not joking. My father's steps halted abruptly. After a few seconds of silence, he grumbled, Luna, in her agonizing pain, laughed like a madwoman. Madwoman? Everyone is mad. As the father and daughter left, the large living room was left with only my mother sobbing and apologies. I didn't even look at her anymore, quietly staring at the black object in Lucas's hand. I really began to doubt. Could they see me only because of the rhino horn? And just as if to confirm my suspicion, my mother suddenly let out a scream. Lucas! Look! 23. As expected, my guess was correct. The rhino horn was just a red herring. My soul began to dissipate. The first to turn transparent were my feet. Lucas looked back, and upon seeing this, his eyes widened in disbelief as he took a few steps backward. How could you disappear? I found it quite relieving. It's actually quite nice, isn't it? No, it's not nice. Lucas shook his head frantically, his expression twisted in pain, crying silently, which shocked me immensely. He was crying. The person who had been so cold and composed even when seeing my lifeless body was now crying. Sienna, don't leave me, don't be so cruel, don't make me watch you disappear. I'll go mad from that kind of despair. I watched as his eyes grew increasingly frenzied, shook my head and said no more. The dissolution of my soul wasn't fast. 2 days passed, and I had only disappeared up to my calves. When Lucas saw that my calves were gone, he showed a desperate smile, like he wanted to cry but couldn't. He hurriedly took out his phone but received no reply to hold me back. After gasping for breath, he suddenly looked up at me. Sienna, what should I do? His voice trembled badly. I watched him silently, watching him get out of bed and frantically search through drawers and cabinets, trying to find even a small piece of something related to me. In the end, he only found a small fragment of a photo, just a tiny piece, only half of my eye. But Lucas treated it as a treasure, holding it close to his heart. Tears poured down like rain. Sienna, I'm sorry. I was so angry before that I threw away everything you left behind, even burned your photos. What should I do? If you disappear, how can I see you again? I tilted my head. Then forget me. Just like you've always done. Anyway, you'll eventually forget me. I heard Lucas clasp his hands around his head, emitting a helpless and extreme wail. My mother also began to visit frequently. Not only did she send over bags of women's clothing, but she also cooked frantically every day, bringing dish after dish to the table. With a cautious look, she introduced each dish to me. Sienna, I don't know what you like to eat, so try all these dishes. When you come back to life, I'll make whatever you like, okay? And also, I bought many beautiful clothes for you, all mother-daughter outfits. When the time comes, we can dress up and go shopping together, okay? No, I don't want that. I want to be with Grandma. 24. Luna was indeed lucky and didn't die. She was saved. My father, without a shred of familial affection, sent her directly to the place where I used to live to stabilize the company. He only gave her 60 yuan a month for living expenses. But the person taking care of her wasn't someone as kind as Grandma. It was a lazy, greedy woman with a temper worse than a spoiled young lady. Whenever Luna expressed dissatisfaction, the woman would start cursing. She used extremely harsh and offensive language, targeting things Luna hated most, calling her an unwanted bastard, a heartless demon who deserved her plight. Having been pampered by her parents and loved ones in the past, Luna couldn't handle being treated like this by a stranger. Seizing the opportunity, she would come to Lucas's door, pleading with my mother to look at her. Mom, didn't you love me the most? My heart hurts so much. Come and see me. Mom. Lucas, look at me. Aren't you the ones who cared about me the most? Look at me. My mother, however, turned a deaf ear, looking at me with a flattering expression and searching the nearby parks, cautiously asking, Sienna, it must be boring at home. Do you want to go out for a walk with Mom? I looked down at my arm, which had already disappeared, and was genuinely speechless. Doesn't she find it scary to go to the park with just a head? Sienna, Mom has already filed for divorce with your dad. My mother suddenly put down the magazine she was holding with red eyes looking at me. Luna was right. I misjudged people, married a profit-seeking, emotionally detached man. It's Mom's fault. Mom is useless. But Sienna, please pity Mom and let me make it up to you. Will you? I paused, thought for a moment, and finally spoke the first words I had said in days. That's good. Live well. My mother shuddered violently, and then began to cry uncontrollably. Sienna, my Sienna. How can I save you? How can I save you? The door upstairs suddenly opened, and a disheveled Lucas rushed down after several days of suffering. He grabbed a fruit knife from the table, preparing to cut his wrist. I was startled. What are you doing? Lucas's face had grown thin, looking like a junkie, but his eyes were very bright. Someone just said that using blood to nourish a soul can share life. I can save you. My mother, hearing this, quickly extended her wrist. I can too. But I calmly refused. But I don't want that. I was left with only my head, and it was frightening. I even wanted to disappear quickly. This world is not good for me at all. I don't want to live. Just consider it a peace for me, and stop bothering me. Only when you're not around can I be happy. I'm going to the underworld now. You all live well, live for a few more years and stop bothering me. Lucas's face was filled with panic, desperately pleading with me. His tears were so numerous that I felt like I was witnessing every tear he would shed in his life. Sienna, don't disappear. Please don't disappear. You've suffered so much and we haven't treated you well. Don't disappear. Please tell me how to save you, how to save you. The extreme despair drove Lucas to a frenzied lament. Feeling helpless, he grabbed a handful of candy from the fruit platter and held it out to me. Sienna, I'll buy you candy. Will you stay? I'll make your future life sweet. Very sweet. Please don't disappear. 25. His hands were trembling uncontrollably. A large portion of the colorful candy fell. My soul had already disappeared up to my nose. Lucas was in despair, slowly kneeling before me. Who should I beg? Who can return you to me? My mother was sobbing incoherently, clutching her chest, lying on the side, calling my name in anguish. Sienna, my Sienna. Sienna, I love. I had lost my ears as well. Their desperate, trapped animal-like cries gradually faded from my hearing. My consciousness was slipping into utter void. Before vanishing completely, I thought, how wonderful. I didn't hear that disgusting phrase. 26. I returned to the underworld. Mengpo was still sitting at her stall, cooking the soup of forgetfulness. Seeing me back, she said nothing and served me a bowl of soup. Try this. Is it good? I took a deep breath and drank a sip. As I closed my eyes, preparing to swallow it down, the familiar taste spread across my tongue. I opened my eyes wide. Grandma's soup. I laughed and cried. Granny, you learned pretty fast. Shouldn't I go for reincarnation now? Grandma must have gone far away, and I need to hurry. A gentle breeze suddenly blew, lifting Mengpo's hat. A familiar, loving face appeared. Grandma! Grandma gently patted my head, her voice echoing throughout the underworld. The soup Sienna loves. Grandma will keep making it forever. 27. After I left, my mother seemed to have lost her mind and failed to divorce my father. Instead, she was brought back by my father to live with Luna. At first, Luna was quite happy about it. But my mother was so dazed that she couldn't recognize anyone. Spending every day clutching the only ugly doll left at home, calling out, Sienna, Sienna. She cooked for it, bought clothes, bathed it, and made up its face. She poured all her maternal love into this doll. My sister, who was beside her, had become like the old me, suffering from my mother's neglect, abuse, and disgust. Sometimes, even in the middle of the night, my mother would sneak into her room with a basin of cold water and pour it over her to wake her up. Then she would laugh and scold. It's all because of you, this debt collector. You made Sienna ignore me. Debt collector. Debt collector. There were many such incidents. Under such torment, Luna's heart disease showed signs of relapse. Every day she was in poor health, with no one to take her to the hospital. She just hung on, enduring my mother's emotional abuse, crying and regretting every day. 28. Lucas drank heavily for several days, giving himself a stomach ulcer. If Caleb hadn't discovered it in time, he might have died in my old room. In the hospital room, Lucas looked dazed, staring at Caleb, clutching the tattered photo of me, his voice breaking with pain. I miss Sienna. I want to die, but Sienna said if I stay alive, I will. Caleb sighed, took out a photo from his pocket, and handed it to Lucas. Lucas, this is a photo of Miss Sienna that I accidentally took with my phone. Although it's only half a face. Lucas took the photo, tears flowing like a flood. Through his tear-blurred eyes, he looked up at Caleb and softly said, Thank you, thank you. After that day, Lucas suddenly seemed to come alive again, no longer drowning his sorrows in drink. He lived and worked normally every day, but whenever he had a moment of free time, he would gaze at that half photo in a daze. Later, he finally agreed to have us cremated and buried together. The location was chosen well, facing the sea, serene and quiet, surrounded by roses that he personally planted, blooming beautifully. The tombstone read, The grave of Hazel and her beloved Sienna. Yes, that's right. Hazel and her beloved will have a very, very good life from now on.